Call to order the short-term rental task force regular meeting on September 7th, 2023. Clerk, can you call the roll? Here. Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Here.
Here. Thank you. Now we get to the approval of the agenda. I would like us to flop the order of BA and BB so that we would begin with the fire department recommendations before we go into recommendations from McKenna. Can I, unless somebody disagrees with that, can I get a motion from somebody to make that change? And you need to describe what the change is.
I will make the motion to modify the agenda, and also is a separate motion to approve then, or how about I will make
to
a motion
modify and
approve a
approve.
modified agenda with B and A flipped.
So make a motion to modify and approve an agenda that changes 4BA to become 4BB. Can you say something like that? I think somebody other than I needs to say that.
I make a motion to approve a modified agenda with 4B, A, and B reversed.
And did you second it, Lauren? All right, all in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right. That takes us to the first public comment session. The session is for anything that is on today's agenda. So every speaker will have up to 3 minutes. And if you can name the agenda item you're addressing when you speak, we'll start with folks in the room.
Agenda item 5A. My name is Peter Hansen, and I live at 441 Spear Street. I hope everyone read the email letter from Brian, who lives on Pleasant Street here in Saugatuck. It was on pages 18 through 24 of the packet that Jamie sent out. It's a great street, but I think it is also a great example of what happens when there is no cap on the number of STRs, no enforcement, and no consequences for bad renters. First of all, we need a cap, and that cap needs to be lower than the percentage of STRs we currently have. Many streets have a higher percentage of STRs, some lower, but 33%, 44%, or even 25% are too many. His letter is way more eloquent than I, so I encourage you to read it, study it, and imagine if you lived there, what you would do. He is stuck. No one who is looking to buy a home to live in would buy on a street with 44% STRs. So his range of buyers are investors, and then the percentage becomes 50%, and so on. When I bought in 2007, there were 2 STRs on our little street, 2-block street. We're up to 5 now. You go a little further in any direction, and I know that percentage is higher. We need a moratorium now on STR applications while we grapple with enforcement, cap percentage, inspections, and consequences. Small steps or little steps will not stem the conversion of single-family homes to STRs. And what we don't want to be is a town of empty homes. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Next in the room.
Hi, Nancy Kimball, 550 Spear Street. I think most of you know me by now. I've spent many of my Thursday afternoons this summer in this very room, sharing it with you and listening to discussion and debate on a very important topic. And of course, not only have I listened, I've also usually had something to say. So I tried to think with this meeting, what could I say that would be different than anything I've said in the past? And as I struggled a bit, I opened the packet and I read the letter. So I'm referencing item 5A, Brian Shipper's letter. And I thought, the same as Peter. I don't know if I can say anything more eloquently than the way Brian phrased it. He listed all the issues and the solutions that he gave were amazing. And what was even more amazing is as someone who is a short-term rental landlord, I'm not sure if that's the right term, he also supports a cap. And I have confidence, having listened to all of these meetings, that you as a group are going to make some recommendations, try to do something to address the issues. But I'm fearful that you're going to shy away from actually recommending a cap. And the reason you might do that is because you think that market forces are in play that will actually solve the problem. But we can't take that risk. It's too important. So getting back to when I was trying to think of what I might say, how am I doing on time? I decided this is 2023 and I shouldn't have to think so hard. I'm going to use some artificial intelligence. So I went on Bing Chat GPT and I asked for a description of Saugatuck. And I'm just going to read you a little bit of it. It's beautiful what they came back with. Saugatuck, Michigan is a small town on the shore of Lake Michigan, known for its artistic and cultural attractions, as well as its natural beauty and outdoor activities. It has a rich history of being a destination for artists, writers, and musicians who have been drawn to its scenic landscapes, historic buildings, and vibrant community. And I emphasize vibrant community. It's home to Saugatuck Center for the Arts, Oxbow School of Arts, and it is not only a place for art lovers, but also for nature lovers. And it goes on and talks about all of our many natural beauties that we have, and basically even cites Oval Beach. So Chat GPT knew about Oval Beach. And it basically ended by saying Saugatuck is a town that celebrates its diversity, creativity, and charm. Then I asked ChatGPT, what kind of recognition has Saugatuck received in the past? And I'm seeing I'm running out of time, which is a long list. And it goes back to 2002. And the first one listed was top 25 arts destination by American Style magazine. And that was before short-term rentals. So I'll just close with saying, if we continue to replace local residents with STRs, our diversity, creativity, and charm will be degraded and our appeal will be lost forever.
Thank you, Nancy. Anyone else in the room? All right, let's go to Zoom. See hands on Zoom. Okay. All right. I see no more comments, so we'll wrap up that for now and get to agenda item 4, review and discussion, beginning with the written objectives. Kyle, actually, Ryan, do you have anything before we turn it over to Kyle? Kyle?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We've, as requested, have finalized the objectives that the task force has gone through and put them onto a paper format, with the 3 predominant ones being listed as aid and support the city of Saugatuck's tourism industry, preserve the character of Saugatuck by enhancing the small town feel, and then effectively enforce short-term rental regulated ordinances. The objectives further detail pathways forward on how to support those in here. We wanted to be mindful within the objectives that these were not recommendations, but just more overarching items and how we could achieve those. Another way we looked at this is more as like a goals and objectives. I know we classified these as the objectives, but more of a mental shift for me. I treated these as your goals, and then how do we achieve those goals by listing them out below in the pathways forward. So these have been now kind of documented in a written format from what we've talked about over the past few months, and then ways that we, professional side, see ways that it could be supported. And these are different than the recommendations that are later discussed in here, more try to keep it broad and all-encompassing to allow flexibility. So that's what I have on the objective. I'm happy to take questions on that, but we did want to provide some context to the objective. So.
Thank you. Any questions from the task force or comments? Okay, then let's move on to B, the draft recommendations. Ryan's going to do a quick introduction on the fire department recommendations and introduce our guests.
Yeah, certainly, Madam Chair. Well, as you know, you've all been hard at work for several months now, and over the last few meetings have been discussing some potential recommendations to put into your report. And one of the or a few of the suggestions were whether or not there should be more frequent inspections of short-term rental units. Right now, we're on a 3-year inspection cycle. And then there's also been some discussion about whether or not there should be some sort of, occupancy limits in short-term rental units. And so reached out to the fire department, and they were very helpful in providing and kind of getting together and providing their thoughts and recommendations, as well as other thoughts and recommendations on short-term rentals as they've been involved with this program in the tri-community area for several years now. And so happy to turn it over to them. They provided kind of a recommendations report in your packet, and I think they're available this afternoon to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Did everybody have a chance, I'm assuming, to read the recommendations? So I want to just express thanks for the great work and thought that you all put into that. And then open it up for questions. They are more than happy to, and I think we'll probably need to have you come to the podium so everybody can hear you. And a quick caveat, if they get a call, they might need to rush off to do their real jobs, but would love to open this up for question for them from anyone here.
I think what they wrote down is essentially what we've been talking about from the beginning. It appears that they seem to be in agreement with the court issues that seem to be popping up every meeting that we have. So whatever path council chooses to go, I would assume they would be accepting of that path as well.
Great. Thanks, Sean. Anyone else or any questions?
So as far as the safety inspections, if the fire department is able to do those safety inspections every other year, it sounds as though they are willing to do that.
I think it was every year.
That conducted every year or every other year.
Okay.
And I know that we had some discussions on how it might be challenging to do every year. That the city could still have renewals of certificates every year, but the safety inspections could possibly be done every other year. And I'm in favor of that.
Okay. Any perspective that our guests have on that? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Of course. Yes, please. And if you would like to introduce them, that would be awesome.
Yes, this is the legendary Bureau of Fire Prevention. Chris Manels, Deputy Chief, Chris Bernardi, Captain behind me, and I'm Greg Janik, Chief. I think this is great. I think it's time to reevaluate this. We support short-term rentals. Always have. I was here when we started the program. I think it's a good time to take a look and reevaluate the process. Some of it's gone a little bit too far. These are single-family dwellings. I'm not here to lecture you. I can share with you concerns when you put 18, 24 people in a house. I think you know that. So a couple of things, whether it's every other year, to be quite frank, when the program was started, we were hoping to do every year. But my directive under the chief at the time was, let's do a low impact deal. We didn't charge for them. So it was, every 3 years, and it kind of evolved. I did 72 units the first year. So it really took off, and the dynamics of the whole rental program changed. Some really good, and some just kind of, the more numbers you get, the more uncivilized it can become. Codes by nature are developed quantitatively. You got 49 people in this room. As soon as you go to 50, you're spending 20 grand for a secondary exit. There is no discussion. One person. You have 101 people, you're putting in a fire alarm system, sprinkler system. Quantitative. What we did is try to take a building designed for a single-family dwelling. Sorry, my back is to you. Take a single-family dwelling and have it multi-use, which is your right and my right. It was all a compromise. But I applaud everybody in this room, at the table, for looking at this saying, what do we want to do? I think what we have to figure out is how to blend the desire to have short-term rentals with some sort of common sense. We are inspecting dormitories. They are not houses. I walked out of a house, I would not inspect it because it was built as a dormitory under a single-family dwelling premise. Why do I care about that? One quick technical aspect. We have a hard time getting 8 to 10 people out of a second floor window. We ladder up. You can't use a stairway. Simple fact. It becomes a chimney. Ask Tanya Sheraton. Burned within 2 minutes going down the stairway. That is the concern. Single-family dwellings only have what? Life over limb? You can't get out in the stairway, go out the window, jump. Not all of us want to do that. So you can't get down the stairway. That's the biggest concern with occupant load for your chief. So how do we get these people out? Number one, they don't know where they're going. They're not familiar with it, like your own home. Disadvantage. But we can't effectively, sometimes we can't even get in the driveway. You're laddering up, taking the ladder 1,000 feet away. We all know it. I won't go into that. But those are some of our concerns. And I think between this group, there's a very smart people here. We can strike a balance on how to blend the desire to have short-term rentals for all the good reasons, but have something sensible. We have a fire in a single-family dwelling. It will be a black eye for Saugatuck. The black eye for Saugatuck is a black eye for everyone. It's a reflection on everything. So I'm to helping. If you have questions, we will try to answer them. They'll probably do a better job than me anyway. So ask away if you have questions. Otherwise, I will let you get on.
Okay, any other questions for the chief or his team?
Just a clarification, Chief. When this is to the occupancy load recommendations that you put forth, those are, I'm gathering from what you're saying, those are primarily based from a safety point of view?
Quantity, what we have is, go on. Chris.
You have some, we've inspected some homes where you'll have a bedroom similar to this size on the second floor, and they want to put 4 to 6 bunk beds up here, where it's a single bedroom, but they're trying to fit 6 to 8 people in there, and that's where we thought was a little unreasonable, that when it was originally built, it was for a couple to have a king bed in as a master bedroom, not a bunch of bunk beds. So that was the number we came up with. And there's plenty of other ways to do it, where you can do it by square footage and whatnot. It just, that's a quicker calculation, that if it has X bedrooms, you can count X people versus having to measure each room in every house that we inspect, was kind of the thought process.
And you're kind of going exactly where I was going to go with my next question. So because you have as examples down here, a 3-bedroom house, 6 people, an 8-bedroom home could potentially have 16 people, but kind of going down the path of, is there maybe Ryan, this is for you, is there a code that specifies how many bedrooms you can actually have based on square footage or the number of bathrooms or things like that? Because where I'm trying to go is, we've heard a lot of public comment relating to noise and other nuisance issues that in a lot of cases seems to be centered around homes that have a large occupancy load in them. So one of the discussions we've been having is does it make sense to limit that load? And, obviously safety is a huge implication, but other than that, trying to just understand are there other quantitative factors that should be considered if we were to continue to debate that subject or make recommendations along that line?
Well, Well, like the first part of that is, yes, there are other quantitative considerations that when you get past a certain number, which I believe is 16, then the home would be sprinkled. It becomes more of a boarding house and goes into the building code instead of the residential code. But that's all quantitative based on square footage and number of rooms. And then that also equates, there's a calculation there for number of toilets per number of people and whatnot too.
Okay.
So.
Joe, may I touch on that, Madam Chair?
Of course,
So
please.
here's the trend. We have well-intentioned landowners, property owners that are building larger homes. When I first started, the average home was 20 to 100 square feet, according to zoning administrator. Now our average home is 4,700 square feet. Our first home in Dunegrass was 10,000 square feet. Bedrooms, we have houses built just for rentals, 12 bedrooms. And then they start filling the living room and the lower level. Hide beds. To me, no. That's enough. You want to live in that? That's fine. We can't get these people out. And that's what you and I should be concerned about. Build it all you want. It's not a single family dwelling. Most families don't have 18 kids or 16 kids or whatever. Let's be honest. I think it should be capped. My guy said, hey, what are we gonna do with all these places that have, 10 bedrooms, 8 bedrooms? That's what this body needs to decide. But I think you have to cap this irrespective of how many bedrooms a person wants to do to generate money because they built too big of a house or they can't afford it. Let's be honest. What's the intent? The intent is not to give wall-to-wall bedrooms. That's what we have.
Thank you.
Steve, how does that contrast to the recommendations you've made of 2 people per bedroom? How does that contrast with what you're currently certifying homes in terms of occupancy load for
I think what
short-term
we have
rentals?
to do is, we have to decide 2 people to a room is excellent. If you have 12 bedrooms, you don't allow 24 people. You cap it. I've got to tell one more time. Okay. So just, it's relative because I had a short-term rental in Beaver Island for 23 years. I had enough for 24 people in there. I would not do it. I've been a landlord 28 years. I retired on it. I kept my house at 8. I walked the talk.
Thank you.
All right.
To answer your question, so currently the way it reads, there's 2 people per bedroom plus 2 per finished floor. So if you have a 2-story house and all 3 floors are finished, like it's a finished basement as well, they're allowed 6 extra people, 2 for the top floor, 2 for the middle, and 2 for the bottom. And that's where they generally end up on the sleeper sofas and whatnot. And that's kind of those extras that we were looking to remove going forward potentially. So.
Thank you.
Other questions? Ann?
Just more of a comment, but, I've noticed in section 8 here for you guys, which I think definitely should be changed. The current fee structure is changing, a yearly, if it's out of date or, that's kind of, it's outdated in that sense, where South Haven, like I refer to that just because we have a sister office, but they're, I think, $600 a year. So even if we just stayed at $350 per year, and you're saying 890 properties, you're talking over $310,000 coming in. So I think that's something that, should be looked at to help offset like the enforcement, hiring someone, whether it's an outside company. But I do agree that it should be more, definitely, maybe to help avoid some riffraff, I don't know, but make it a yearly process and, make it kind of, where they have to pay for it.
Great. Sean?
And I'm coming completely from a logistics standpoint. This has nothing to do with money, but having the pleasure to work with you guys for years and years, knowing that you got several other things to do. In your opinion, what do you think is a timeline for recertifications? Should it stay as it is? Should it, right now it's every, what, 3 years? For research, like what makes sense to you on an established rental property that passes consistently, the dwelling structure doesn't change, things like that. Now, if there was a change, I would expect there to be some type of, it needs to be re-inspected, but just what's your opinion? And I'm not talking about money.
Right.
I'm just talking like for you guys.
I think as we put in, I think it's number 1 on our letter, that we did recommend annual inspections, that like we inspect all the bed and breakfast, all the R1 hotels and motels on an annual basis. And those buildings haven't generally changed, but it's making sure that the smoke alarms the batteries have been changed.
Okay.
The extinguishers have been certified annually. So treating them very similar to what they are, that they are a hotel, motel, essentially, or boarding house. So they're getting the same kind of inspection process. And then from our aspect of the scheduling piece of it too, the 3-year thing is kind of confusing because it's for owners and everybody, where if we do it annually, maybe we can get it set up where X
Cycle.
property is always done in January, or this lot of 100 is always January, this lot is always February, and they know and we know that it always comes up the same time every year, kind of thing, that might make the scheduling actually easier with owners and agents versus always having to call and.
There's so many different cycles and.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that was kind of our thought behind it, that annual would almost probably be preferred over even every other year, from our aspect.
So Lauren, I'm curious just to hear more about your concern or your preference for every other
My
year.
biggest thing
versus-
was just wondering if you guys had the staffing to do it on a yearly basis.
Well,
Yeah.
Yes.
Kind of where I was going, yeah.
So if staffing and money weren't an issue, which I know those are big ifs, but if it could be staffed and paid for, would you support
I think
annual?
we just had a few residents that thought the scheduling would be challenging, but as you mentioned, if we, if it could be determined that every year it's always in January for this property
Yeah.
owner, I think that could work for some people.
All right, great. Thank you. That's helpful. Yes, Sean.
I mean, the other part of what we hear a lot is fees. And I got a little problem with the fees, we're paying $350 every 3 years. So if we want to change that fee and do it yearly, there's some properties I have multiple STRs, so I'm paying 4 fees on something that is going to be kind of priced out of it. So I'm a little bit concerned about talking about fees. I think safety is number 1. I like yearly, but I'm going to have a problem if I have a property with 4 or 5 STRs on it that I'm spending that kind of money with. But on the other hand, I'm also about efficiency, where I do believe that the fire department has a tough time doing 100 STRs in April, because it's convenient for the property owner to be here in April, where we ought to be able to take these and spread them out, be able to schedule them. They have emergencies to be able to say, well, we couldn't meet this one this week, so we have capacity to do it next week. But I think when we think about fees for this, if we're going to raise this fee and then we're going to raise an STR fee, and next thing you know, we're kind of backwards on this. And when I look at the time it takes, I don't know what happens behind the door, but most of the time someone comes in, even my fire guy that comes in and checks my fire extinguishers, $300 later, and my gosh, he was there 10 minutes. He checked 30 of them because I bring all of them to him. But then next thing you know, if I had to do that twice a year, that's awful expensive. So I just, when you figure out your fees, just keep that in mind too, that some of the people have multiple STRs to deal with. And, I think about efficiencies too. If you are going to hire someone else to do it, that my 5 units shouldn't pay for that one person to do that. I mean, it's just something to consider.
Good point.
Madam Chair, can I comment on? Sean?
Yes, please do.
I think Sean's right. You look at, sometimes you're not paid for what you do, what you know. In this instance, I think Sean's got a valid point. When you maintain annual inspections, they go quicker. Shouldn't the cost reflect that? Should be reduced. 3 years is a pain. Always has been. when we do annual inspections and we held off because of COVID, we would come back to businesses 2, 3 years ago because we couldn't be in the building. Nobody wanted us in there. And things changed, not for the better. So I think, number one, I think there's no equity when you have the same use and you have a 3-year cycle. And then you hold a hotel to 1 year that has far more safety features than a home. And some of these are what, 3, 4, 5,000 a week. And I have a hard time telling me you can't afford that. I think annual is fair. And I think it should be reduced as maintained. An initial inspection or 2 or 3 year void could be different, could be more. But an annual could be a cost basis. Less time, it costs less. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think we've talked, and I think it'd be good just to check in on this with everybody about having our fees for inspections and licenses that we capture the costs. I mean, I don't think we could make money on it legally, but we're not looking to make money. We're just looking to capture the costs of the service or that's being provided. So if in fact it is more efficient on an annual basis, you don't have to spend as much time, that would be reflected and in aggregate, we just want to in aggregate be whole so that city isn't underwriting inspections. Are we all kind of in agreement that works?
Absolutely.
In my opinion, and most, all my rental owners would have no problem with the fee going up. I mean, the revenue source, at the end of the day, it's less than a 1-night booking for a calendar year. For peace of mind to know that your home is safe.
I just think it's the right thing to do. Annual inspections are pretty typical. Some industries are 3 years for an industrial factory type setting. Residential, as you see in your packet, is the highest safety risk. So kind of our strategy on getting there more often.
Great. Any other questions? Any other comments you guys want to make?
Thank you for letting us speak.
And thank you for coming in and for your terrific work and the perspective. It was great. It was really interesting to read about the hazards of residences. So you made us smarter.
If you need us, you know how to get us.
Great. Thank you.
911 when you're.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that takes us to the new draft recommendations, B, recommendations and analysis from McKenna.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If we could as well to keep in mind, so we have the Saugatuck Township Fire District's recommendations. I would ask that as we move forward with the task force probably accepts all or, structure it in some way that you're going to accept the Saugatuck Fire Authority's district's review as is, or less recommendations, just food for thought to go in there. Reading through this, our team would like to accept all of these recommendations into the final from the fire department. It's very valid. We've seen it in other communities as well. So that is our recommendation to accept all of their conditions and thoughts. But again, that's up to the task force ultimately. So I don't know if there's any concerns on that before the fire department leaves, but that would be our recommendation to accept their 10 recommendations into our final report. I want to leave that up for discussion before they leave.
Any
further
questions, concerns about that?
Just one.
Okay.
I agree with everything they're saying. The only, and I think I sort of heard it from the chief is, and maybe it's a topic we should discuss, but having a statutory limit that goes beyond the 2-person per bedroom occupancy limit. And I'm responding more to the point that Chief made around some of the structures where there's a large number of bedrooms and, we're getting occupancy loads north of 16% or 16 people. I think, there should be limits below that number. What that number is, probably something we should discuss at some point in time, but just say 2 per bedroom and know that there's structures out there that have been engineered with a very large number of bedrooms to put as many people in there. I think, just continues to promote safety issues as well as, further nuisance issues, which is what we're obviously here trying to address. So that would be my only comment.
So thoughts on that? And I'm also curious from our fire professionals, if there is a number in a residential structure that you think is too many and whether we should consider, and how many, I mean, do we have a sense of how many SDRs have more than?
Good chunk of Pleasant Street, I know that much.
I mean, we have a property that is 9,000 square feet and 8 bedrooms, 8 bathrooms, and it's sleeping 16. So, and it's on Lake Shore. Most sleep in like grandparents, because it's so expensive. So it's like families.
Yeah.
It's-
Bachelorette parties pay for that.
Right, yeah,
Right.
they're not shelling out 35,000 a week, so.
Yeah, that'd be great.
For the folks.
We're
at
getting
home.
your steps in.
In my opinion, 12. I don't care how big it is, you cap it at 12.
We have that in his recommendations.
Madam Chair,
Yes, sir.
the only thing that, I guess concerns me is, we've been doing these meetings for all summer long. And then this week, after the holidays, I get the fire department's recommendations, and now all of a sudden, it's just gonna show up on a recommendation thing. So it's a little bit shocking to say we haven't really talked about all the recommendations, and gone through it like we have all the other topics that I just to automatically flip a switch and say, we're gonna take their recommendations and move forward, quite frankly, scares me a little bit, but I just think it needs to be discussed. Maybe not today, but it's gotta be discussed of whether or not that fits what we've been talking about for the last, 12 weeks we've been doing this.
Right. Are there as you read through, were there things you flagged that gave you pause? Because I think I'm happy to spend some time talking about that now.
Well, I think they have, I mean, it's the same thing, right? They're saying the same things we've been saying.
Correct.
They're wording it differently. They're looking at it differently than what we are. So I just want to make sure that the way we're thinking about it is the same way they're thinking about it versus just saying, yep, we're going to take the recommendations, push it forward and move
Right.
on. We just got to make sure that they're all in sync. And
Right.
I just wanted to voice that.
Yeah,
Just,
it's a really good point. What I'm hoping where we land at the end of this meeting is that between what McKenna's recommending and what the fire department has recommended, that we do, where there's consensus among all of that, we say, yep, we're all good with this. And there probably, I'm guessing, going to be some areas where we might not agree. And so the report that we would provide to planning that then, would eventually go to council would say, here's some, here was the discussion around caps, for example. There was not consensus among if this is true, and it might not be, but there was not, consensus among the task force for the path forward. Here are the different options that were discussed. And then that would be in the report. Given this is a recommendation, we aren't, a decision-making body, the recommendation would be that planning and council would debate and discuss that further.
yeah, and I believe, as I read through it, the key things I personally thought were on it were occupancy seemed to be the most important
Right.
for us and
Yep.
the fire department.
Yep.
That if we, I will use the term cap, if we were to cap something off, then occupancy seems to be the consensus of where everybody's at. Fees always come up,
Right.
whether it's plus $1 or minus $1, however that is. That's
Right.
probably number 2. And then number 3 is whether or not it's 3 years, 2 years, or 1 year.
Right.
That to me, that's kind of what I got out of whatever recommendations were out of there. So it still kind of goes to following the same pattern that we had. So that's what I read out of it.
So I think this is a great time because those are three really important topics to, around fees. We talked about making sure that the fees cover the costs of the city's service, and it seemed like there was consensus for that. In terms of capping numbers, I think that's a good, the fire chief just recommended a number to us. I think we should discuss that. And either say, yep, we agree that 12 is right, or we can say this was the fire chief's recommendation. There wasn't consensus among the task force, and, have that up for further consideration.
Yeah, I mean, every time I do the math, 8 to 12 seems to be normal. It's a normal house. It's normal bedrooms. I don't know if I 100% agree the 2 extra per floor, but, if 12's a number and that's what's chosen, I think the majority of the city would be able to live with that, knowing that there's kind of like a top to it.
Well, I think eliminating the extra people per floor, if you're just doing it 2 people per bedroom, that would allow for an 8-bedroom house to have 16, but you would have to have an actual bedroom.
But I might have misunderstood, then I'm going to ask the chief to clarify whether an 8-bedroom house could go to 16, or if an 8-bedroom house would be capped at 12.
I think that's the discussion, what we should decide. How do we blend? I believed our recommendations addressed your concerns and everybody else's majority. And I think we have to come to some sort of conclusion on a consensus base. Like Sean said, my vision of a short-term rental is, 8 to 12 people, not 16, not 18, not 24. And I think that if this body, along with input from others, decides, okay, 14, 15, you want to cap it at, we're receptive to talking to you about that. Certainly don't want to diminish what all you've worked hard for over 4 people. Quantitative, it just is trying to evacuate a home, because most likely that'll be a 2-story home. There lies the issue that we have. And the fires now, the new homes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, they're involved. Because why? Lightweight construction. So there's some technology to this. Synthetics. We don't get to call for 5 minutes. So how do we get these people out of a burning building when they can't get out? Those are the dynamics we think about. Most of us have different ways of looking at this. Optimum revenue. I get it. I was a landlord too. Now I'm in a safety profession. I have been. And I see the results of excessive occupant loads. And I advise you, take a quick look at when you start letting 18 people in a home. They wake up, they don't know where they're going. That's what I think the danger lies in. Is this what we want? Even though you've got the space. Is the idea to cram in? No, it's not. Allow short-term rentals. Density is another subject. But please consider limiting the load to a reasonable expectation. It has an impact. The neighbors, the garbage, the cars. I think I've been asking for 4 years to put no parking on one side of Pleasant Street. I gave up. I can't get through there. One of your biggest problems is Pleasant Street. So my suggestion is 12 because that's the average house. Houses built in the last 5, 6 years are much larger. Some of them intentionally built for rentals. You got to decide they can still rent them What do you want to cap it at? I don't even know how you're gonna get 3 cars in a driveway in Saugatuck City. Suppose you can. Do you want to? There's no parking now. So I think there's gotta be some benchmarks set and some common sense on expectations to not lose this is not the Saugatuck we all know anymore. We've evolved. Okay. How far do we want it to evolve? It'll all be about the money. Some of us want to live here. That make sense?
Makes,
Okay.
yeah. Lauren, question? Sean?
No, and I think, I mean, the bedroom is a good benchmark for me.
Okay.
Good measure for me. Whether someone puts 4 bunk beds in it, that's, I guess, unreasonable to me, but a bedroom's a bedroom. And I don't think you can stack them up like cordwood and say there's 4 bedrooms in 1 bedroom. But, you know, I personally, I like, you know, the 8 to 12 number, whatever comes out of it. I think it sounds reasonable to me.
So are we comfortable with 2 people per bedroom, but a maximum cap per house of 12? Are we okay with that?
I would have picked a lower number, but well, I mean, I always go back to what problem are we trying to solve? And safety in my mind, nothing eclipses that, right? And I bow to the, you know, our fire chief and our fire department for, you know, setting what they believe are reasonable standards. And it makes me comfortable to hear that number 12. So that's, I look at that in one dimension, but I also look at, you know, and we've had great discussions around residential versus commercial. And I look at residential zones and I say, well, what's reasonable for a single family residential house? You know, where do you draw the line before you say this is a commercial enterprise that is competing or operating similar to a hotel or a bed and breakfast, where there's on-site management, where there's more rigorous safety protocols that are put in place? Is it 12? I don't know. In my mind, it's closer to 8. Will I call 12 a win for the purposes of what we're trying to do here? You could probably twist my arm and I'll get there, but I think the number is actually lower when you get into the residential zones.
So thoughts on that? So to get to 12, you would need a 6-bedroom house.
Correct.
Okay. So where are others on that?
And the house that you're talking about isn't in a residential zone. It's on the beach, right?
Yeah, it's not
Yeah,
like shore
so
drive.
there's
and
a lot of
it's-
distance
Right.
between the homes that are right nearby,
Right.
and it's probably not in the city of Saugatuck, is it, or is
No,
it?
it's not.
Yeah.
But
So-
I think what you'll find though is the township and city of Douglas will more than likely follow suit of what the city of Saugatuck is going to do. And then this particular homeowner who we've already started taking reservations for next year for a family of 15 that has, you know, come. They've already booked for next year, another family of 14. So now we have to tell them leave 2 kids at home or, you know, so it's kind of, you know, I don't know about maybe if there's possibility of discussion for grandfathering in at some point. For some of these properties that are legit 7-bedroom, 8 bedrooms, and on a case-by-case basis and not by, no bunk beds in that case. Like, you know, I agree. I don't think, you know, these rooms should have, you know, I've seen some properties that we turned away because they put 6 bunk beds in a bedroom. And I'm like, this is not gonna fly. It's not gonna fly. I mean, for us, it's a headache. So, but I think, you know, when you have someone that has bought a house, you know, based on those bedrooms and is following the 2 people per bedroom, and, you know, it's, you know, they're being punished in some sense.
So,
But, and I think, Lauren, you might have been going down an interesting path there, but if they're in a non-residential zone, maybe there's a difference. Maybe we can say commercial, non-residential, that there's a different, you know, tier, if you will. But in a residential zone where you have close neighbors,
does
where
that,
you have a majority of the nuisances that seem to be popping up, maybe that number's lower. I don't know.
I'm curious to hear the chief's perspective of residential versus non-residential. Does that affect your view of what that number should be?
Good question. So the program, pretty much Saugatuck has smaller homes, small sites. All the buildup is going to be in the township. particularly anything built in the last 10, 12 years, they're much larger. So Salt Lake City, you have your traditional 2,000 square foot, 3-bedroom home. And I think that's where you have, I personally think your occupant load in Salt Lake City is going to be lower. As, may I call you Ann?
Yes,
Yeah.
oh, sure.
As Ann says, you do have dynamics of some larger homes, and we'll have to deal with township on that. What do you want to do with this? So if it's 19 bedrooms, do we let in 38 people just because you can? I think what you have before you is enough substantial information to say, okay, we want to allow the rentals. It in a way defines Saugatuck now. However, we're going to limit at least the occupant load, which is going to eliminate some of your problems. I understand the perspective from an agent and all that. I understand the perspective of having 2 or 3 families come. Well, I would love to do that if my dad was alive. The reality is, it wasn't built for that. There are differences, clearly differences, and you have enough substantial evidence strictly from the code say, this is where our fires are. They are single-family dwellings. So why do we want to put because we can? And I'd say this for me, okay? Why do we want to do that? I don't want to do that. We talk about property values. I don't want to move next to a rental. Let's go there.
Right. Well, I think we'll have that discussion shortly. So,
Sorry, but no, I don't. But
right.
I have no control over that. My point is, we are certainly receptive. I'm sorry Sean felt blindsided. We got this,
Yeah, no,
we
we're
dropped what we were doing to respond to it.
right. No, but
And I'm sorry, we didn't mean to blindside anybody, but I think that we should work together, collaborate. Say, what's a balance? What's reasonable? Because we got these
right.
12-bed homes and we have the typical.
Well, given that the big homes are not in Saugatuck, I mean, we are the city of Saugatuck Short-Term Rental Committee. So I don't think we need to solve for the township or Douglas. And I mean, we can certainly collaborate and talk with them. And I think so. For the city of Saugatuck, it sounds like 2 per bedroom with a maximum of 12. Or does that? And this isn't the last discussion. We'll meet again on the 21st. But for McKenna to put into the revised report they give us on the 21st, can we, Sean, do you feel like that will give you enough time to process and?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Anything, being mindful of time? Any more comments? Happy to hear, but also ready to move on if we're ready to move on.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, Sean, back to you. Or not Sean, Kyle, back to you.
I'm gonna keep going, sir. Thank you, Chair, and to the task force for indulging me with the further discussion with the fire district. We felt it very prudent to hear their observations and concerns, especially in this, especially as it relates more to like a Ryan side of items with planning and zoning in the future. So again, thank you for letting me indulge with that, that discussion. So before you here, we provided some recommendations. These are based on our months of discussions. These are based on the survey inputs, the public comment we've had, observations we've had. And we've structured this in a way that we can accept, all the recommendations in the heading, none of the recommendations, a few of the recommendations, but we wanted to provide the task force options beforehand. So in this regard, I'll go briefly because I know there's a few that probably aren't as in depth that we need to go. The first one, Good Neighbor Guide. We've heard that a lot. Recommendation is to develop that with different considerations in the Good Neighbor Guide. Anne has graciously provided some additional documents for us that we can add to the Good Neighbor Guide recommendation that might highlight on, contact information, trash, parking, noise. So items that the task force has already, very well heard of from public comment the past 4 months. So those can be added into what a Good Neighbor Guide may have. we've had concerns with noise, so we have a few recommendations in here on that. A request that city council review the existing noise ordinance to determine if increasing the time of quiet hours is appropriate as number one. Number two, request that planning commission encourage city council to review the ability to create a noise ordinance for residential districts. You'll find that a lot of these are structured in a way to encourage and request, again, because this is a non-policy decision body, only a recommending body. That's why our recommendations are structured as such that, you know, we are recommending the task force inquire with the appropriate bodies of government for further analysis on this. Fire safety.
Before we move on, can we just kind of do this in real time and get feedback from the task force? So for the Good Neighbor Guide, are people on board with that recommendation? Seemed like it. Okay, and noise, are you comfortable passing along those recommendations to the Planning Commission?
The only thing I would add potentially is, and I know you're touching on it separately, but enforcement, you know, restructuring the ordinance does zero good if we don't enforce what's on the books, obviously. But
Right, I think we'll get to that with a,
It made sense to tie it in here as well, but I'm fine either way. just so I
Okay.
Pointed out.
okay,
Anything else on noise?
no,
All right.
fire safety?
Fire safety, this was, and again, thank you to Ryan for reaching out to the fire district to ask for their initial input. So that is where, two of these recommendations come from communication we were able to receive from the fire district on that. This can be further revised to incorporate their report, in the future, but just to get something in front of the task force, there was two recommendations. And again, this ties directly to communication we received from them. Number one being, feasibility study to determine if safety inspections can be conducted every year. That has now been addressed by the fire department, so we will
Right.
update that. So I'll make a note of that one. Number two, explore reducing occupancy limits that align more with single-family residential dwellings. We touched on that, so that can be, you know, updated as well. And then number three, request that a fee study be conducted to ensure that the amount of staff time going into inspecting rentals adequately covers municipal expenses. I know Sean's brought that up. I think we kind of discussed that enough. Okay.
Right,
And again, anything kind of tied with us with fees, at least Sean, to your point on that, is just to ask that they be reviewed further. So it's not to potentially increase, decrease, it just asks that we take the appropriate body takes a look at them further.
great. And Kyle, just to confirm then, when you send us this report back, the other recommendations from the fire department will be folded in here.
Correct.
Awesome, great. Anything, any comments on that? All right, trash.
So number one, this came about again, because I know we've had a lot of concerns with the amount of trash piling up. I did reference a section in here, section 154.00022.v. Require all short-term rentals that are certified to have a second residential refuse container on there. If you're residential property, you can have the single one, but if you're certified, then you would then be required to have a second dumpster on site. Hoping that would help alleviate some of the trash concerns that are on there. Yes, it is an additional cost, but it's what, $12 a month? I don't know how much. I don't want to give any false hope, but we felt that it was still prudent enough hearing the concerns over the past 4 months that a short-term rental should have a second dumpster.
I also think we should talk about maybe, like, we have some properties that are 12 people, and we make them do 3 garbage cans.
Yeah, I think if we go to an occupancy
yeah.
thing, I think you can tie that
Right.
in.
Like how many occupants per?
Yeah, I think could you amend that to, so that one or two more depending on occupancy?
We're happy to do that if that's a task force wish. I might defer a little bit to Ryan on that one, though. Would also be then now you have to then do the additional look at what the occupancy is, so it does add a step. I would defer to Ryan on his staff time on that. Our thought with recommendation number one is just clear across the board, whether you're 4-unit or 8-unit, 6-unit bedroom, however it happens to be, you get an additional dumpster, you just know that offhand. Again, I defer that to Ryan and then the task force if you'd like it to be based on occupancy.
Ryan, your thoughts?
Not to put you on the spot, Ryan, but just to.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, particularly have a concern with, as the applications come in, the the property owners indicating what they believe at least the occupancy would be. Obviously, the max occupancy is set by the fire department in the end. So at the time that they're submitting an application and say that they believe the occupancy should be 10, we could look at whatever the ordinance requires they have trash receptacle wise. We can have a line on there to say how many trash receptacles are you providing to make sure that that's addressed. And then if it comes up as an issue, then we would certainly follow up and make sure that they're providing the
I mean, using the 12 cap, maybe it's for every 4 people, you have 1 trash can or something. Okay, could we add adding additional recycling as well for those who have recycling? Because I think that's also an issue. If you have 1 recycling bin, it
Uh,
often
My
overflows.
question on that though, and would be further follow-up, is we are pretty confident trash is required, correct, in ordinance to some regard. Is recycling required?
No, but for those who provide recycling, so we aren't mandating that people have recycling, but if you do have recycling, should we ask them to also increase recycling bins if we're asking them to increase their trash bins? And,
It only gets picked up once
Once
a
a
month.
month.
all right, okay.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely, we hope to be in negotiations with our trash hauler anyway. So
Right.
we're hoping for more than once a month recycling, so that'll
Well,
hopefully
so then,
solve that
Holly,
issue
if I could
anyway.
ask Lauren on that one, then, we could establish it to a recommendation that any short-term rental is required to have a recycler, recycling bin, if they don't already. We could make a recommendation in that regard.
Well, I'm all for recycling, so that for me would be a no-brainer, but I also don't, I mean,
I think that's, what's the word that came out today, quantitative?
Yeah.
So you get 12 people, you know, it's whatever the magic number is.
why don't, maybe we recommend that as the city reviews its recycling and trash, that they consider, updating the short-term rental requirement. And so that will, okay, all right. Cool. You got that?
Yes.
Awesome.
Number 2 was, we talked about already, containers for short-term rentals, from April to November of each year. So that way it would have to be, not only would you need a can, but, or a separate recommendation would be just to have a second can from April to November during the peak season for that. That's up to the task force. They feel that would be a benefit, instead of a year-round can, if you're certified, to a more timeline. But then, just the devil advocate, my own recommendation here, now you have to pick up, drop off, so task force wanted to ask that if, that would be the only other recommendation on that, is if you go from a certified having a second can to certified having it from April to November.
I think that can be folded in with what we asked the city to do as they're revisiting the trash and recycling. Let's kick that one over to them. I mean, not that it won't get kicked over to you anyway, Lauren, so.
That kind of, Holly, ties into number 3 anyway, to ask that the city
Great.
administration review. So we'll, tweak these to an extent.
Cool. Great.
Questions on trash?
Think we're good.
Compliance officer, recommendation number 1 is to encourage city administration to explore hiring a dedicated code enforcement, code compliance officer to address short-term rental concerns. Such staff members would be able to respond to resident comments arising from noise, trash, occupancy, and other ordinance violations.
Okay, any concerns with that recommendation?
The only concern I have is, what are they gonna do when they don't have short-term rentals to deal with?
So Joey Andrews, our representative, had a listening session at the Douglas Saugatuck Library last Friday. And actually Douglas's mayor suggested that there might be a way with the schools, because it sort of, when schools and short-term rentals are out and vice versa, there might be a way to resource share with the schools, school safety officer. So I think, again, it's something that we could recommend that,
I mean, I called the city of Holland and asked them, how many code enforcement officers they had, because they have short-term rental on their agendas as well. and they have one officer for 35,000 homes.
Yep.
Um, they did have in the past a part-time that would come in and help, but by the time they trained the part-time, the season was over. And next year they'd have to do it again. So they actually eliminated the part-time coming in. So when I'm doing the math of that, you know, we have 1,000 homes or properties here. So that's where I'm like, okay, what are we gonna do the rest of the time?
But didn't Holland shut down their short-term rentals with the exception of certain, or greatly reduce the number that they have to a very low
This
number?
particular code enforcement person does everything.
Oh,
from
they do
tall
everything.
grass to
Okay.
trash to dogs barking to cars, abandoned cars. But I think what's important is to realize that with the conversation with the city of Holland as well, is code enforcement is very difficult to accomplish. That officer has to be at the house 3, 4, sometimes up to 8 times before anything really happens. So it's very, very time consuming, takes a lot of time. So I understood all that, but then I thought, okay, but again, that's times 35,000 homes or properties.
Right.
So, I like the idea of a part-time person to come in because essentially we're talking about a third of the season. That's our heavy time frame. But I also think that that would be something to look at to, you know, have a good job description of what they're involved with, because it's gonna be hard for them to go out and do a citation for parking. I mean, that's just a terrible,
I
endless battle, but.
I think one thing we can do is sort of recommend the what we want to have happen. And then, city staff, working with the guidance from planning and then council can come up with the how. So our recommendation is we think we need some resource for compliance. And then really, because I think city staff then can come back with recommendations on how best to do that.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the fire department too. You know, they had a recommendation. I know we've brought it up before about if you're a short-term rental, you're posting your
Yep.
license or whatever in the front window.
Yep.
If we go to an occupancy side of it, you know, it'll say what it is. If someone's going by and they see 12 cars and has an occupancy of 8, there's a red flag. Why is there 12 cars here? I think that that's a tool that can help with code enforcement.
Right.
Without an actual body going and looking in a database and go, what does this address have? I mean, it's a visual thing. The neighbors can see it.
Yep.
It's kind of right in front of everybody. When the guests show up, there's that sign right there, and that's what you're going to be measured by. So I think that, you know, I just think enhancing code enforcement may be a good recommendation, and maybe have a few ideas of what that could be versus just hire someone else. I know hiring's.
Yep. Okay. Is everybody good with that approach?
Yeah, if it's necessary, we hire someone.
Right. Yes, I don't think we need to solve all the problems. I think we need to define what problems
Yeah.
need to be
We
solved.
need to do-
Okay, great.
Recommendation number 2 on compliance officer was just to review existing fees associated with short-term rentals. We talked about that. And then the following few on here under general modifications really didn't fit into a specific heading, but we thought they were still prudent to include. Number 1, encourage the creation of a short-term rental registration public database in which the property owner management company contact information is made available. That's been based on past discussions we've had. That's why that's there. Encourage the creation of a general call-in line in which residents may leave non-time sensitive concerns with city officials regarding short-term rentals. So instead of having just to leave a message on Ryan's, number, it can go to another general call line that can be monitored. Number 3, encourage the review of a short-term rental certification fees to ensure proper funding for staff time. We've already kind of highlighted on that. Number 4, encourage planning commission to review the existing requirement of having a local representative or rental agency within 45 miles of the city of Saugatuck.
Before we move off that, and Mark is here, I think Mark Klungel said at an earlier meeting that the original intent for that was to be within 25 miles and 45 minutes. And we might think about going back to, I think those got transposed.
The fire department recommended 15.
15, okay, so we've got that,
miles
that's
of
right.
Property.
Okay. Thank you for reminding me of that.
Yep, so we can update that to be more in line with. the
With
fire
this,
department.
yep, okay.
So we'll update that. Number 5, encourage city administration to review the existing fines associated with a zoning ordinance violation. Again, that's kind of outside of our wheelhouse, but something that we can pass along. Number 6, request that the planning commission review setting a maximum occupancy limit for short-term rentals per the zoning ordinance. Where the occupancy limit for the fire department is less than the maximum permitted by zoning ordinance, the more restrictive would apply. We've kind of already solved
Already
that.
called that, yep.
That one. Number 7, encourage city administration to review areas within residential districts in which no parking this side of the street signs can be installed to aid in emergency services access.
Yep.
I think we've heard that. And then recommendation number 8 is encourage city administration to review the ability to revoke a certificate for a short-term rental if multiple complaints are validated within a 12-month period. And what we mean by validated is actually confirmed they are in violation of the zoning ordinance or the short-term rental policy, not just that they've had complaints on them, so that they are actually well done.
One other thing that I know we've talked about that I think makes a lot of sense is to require short-term rental people to list their license number in their ads. Because that's a way to help get at the non-licenses. And that's something that we can, I think that's worth adding. And I think the fire department recommended posting the certificates. Is that correct in theirs? They did not.
Yep, they did.
They did, okay,
you know,
yep.
One, I think, interesting consideration on that, just to think about, I think some communities do require that certificate be posted in like a window or something. I think, in talking with, South Haven recently, I think they're kind of evaluating that again because they've had some problems with some folks, maybe going to look at the certificate and looking at more than just the certificates. And, it's created some, I guess, conflict between, neighbors. So, something to consider. Doesn't mean that we can't try it here and see how it goes. So.
Yeah, I heard that some neighbors or homeowners were complaining of trespassing.
Okay.
People peeking in their windows and stuff. I know.
All
I know.
right.
To that extent, too, Madam Chair, and this would be something for city administration to determine, but a certificate could be very generic and just says this home meets the requirements of the short-term rental, and then that way there's no public information on there. It's just a generalized placard that says yes, they have been certified.
Okay.
That way, it keeps a lot of their other personal information on that as well.
Would that be something that maybe could be tied into
Database.
the database? So if somebody's looking on there, they have that information on how
Yep.
many people, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, good point. Yes.
If we make a recommendation for the license number, wasn't it Airbnb or Verbo to be compliant with the city ordinances or the
Yeah.
city STRs? They require that to happen, so.
I don't think they do. I think the city has to tell them to, but I'm not sure. And
But that may solve some of
Like-
the VRBOs or the Airbnbs that aren't signed up for the STR program, and not be able to advertise in the city. That's the solution to one of those problems by asking for that recommendation.
Brian?
Yeah, we can explore that further. I think I kind of like the thought that was brought up to just generally require that in any ad that the certificate number be posted. So that way, some folks don't advertise on those sites, but they may have their private sites or on Facebook or so at least any advertisement that goes out related to a short-term rental, as long as the person's being required to post that there's a certificate number, that at least provides some accountability to make sure that, hey, I'm a registered unit.
Right. Okay.
Recommendation 7 is just a general, that doesn't necessarily apply to a rental or a rental automobile.
Correct. Yep.
Along those lines, it wouldn't hurt to possibly recommend that in certain zones specifically, I think of like on the hill to have parking passes that correspond similar to the bed and occupancy quantitative ways to measure that you will, in the size of the driveway, that you get X amount of parking spaces based on the size of your property.
Yeah.
So when our property preppers come, they come with a green tag and it's dated from the time they stay to the time they depart. And then it's supposed to go in the rearview mirror of the car to help identify that that's one of our cars, so we're not towing it, or we see a car on the grass and it should be in the drive. It's just a good way to help mitigate that.
If you could tie that together, that might solve the 18 people in a house that can only have 2 cars.
Yeah.
Drive.
Yeah.
So I think the occupancy, that number is a number that kind of solves a lot of solutions throughout all of the different
Yep.
recommendations.
She got a clown car coming in.
Kyle, do you have what you need?
For that, yeah, and then I'm ready to move on to the next section if the task force is.
Great.
In the Madam Chair, we'll work with yourself and staff as well early next week to just get those revised back out before they go back for one final review to the.
Terrific. Thank
Sure.
you.
Okay. So the next portion, if the chair will indulge me, talks about residential caps. We've already highlighted it as well throughout past presentations. We felt that though it might be prudent to bring it back as a different standalone policy itself instead of within the recommendations. Again, we wanted to recap that, citywide response for caps, 281 respondents were opposed to the 204 that were in favor. That number does change as we look into, area residents versus non-residents, residential versus non-residential. So that's where we're at. It is kind of split to an extent on who's in favor. Full-time residents seem to be more in favor, part-time or second homeowners less in favor of a residential cap, like we discussed before on that. So with that, and then the further analysis we've done on this, we've talked about potential cap policies because we understand that some may be in favor, others may not. So these are, we wanted to preface, are just potential policies that could be reviewed further or as a recommendation. Policy number 1, which is on page 16 of your packet, is to explore the creation of a citywide cap on short-term rentals. Such a cap would be applied to all zoning districts. The cap limit would be an estimated 10 certificates higher than what is on record at the time the policy is adopted. Therefore, meaning that we capture everything that is active, and then just in case there is a few that were not known, we don't want to single anyone out. So we would set it just above what we have on record for at the time of adoption to ensure we have all those encapsulated. Once the cap limit is received or achieved, no new certificates will be issued. Residential properties that are in good standing and currently having a short-term rental certificate would be permitted to renew, subject to complying with all applicable zoning regulations and fire safety stipulations. Once the number of a short-term rental certificates falls below the established cap number, new certificates could be issued up to that cap limit. So if you already have one and you're renewing, this policy advises that you could continue to renew so long as you're in good standing. It wouldn't kick anyone off, just no new properties could then come on board. That's the citywide policy number 1. Questions on that, or otherwise I'm happy to keep.
Why don't we go through all of them and then we can.
Yeah. Residential district cap, explore the creation of a residential district cap limit. Such a limit would be applicable to all residential districts, exempting out the downtown area and commercial areas. Cap limit would be an estimated, again, 10 certificates higher than what is on record at the time the policy is adopted. In residential properties that are in good standing and currently have a short-term rental certificate would be permitted to renew, subject to complying to all applicable regulations. Once the number of short-term rental certificates falls below the established cap number, new certificates come in. So it mirrors a citywide cap, only we reduce it down to just the residential districts themselves, accepting out the downtown and commercial areas. Policy number 3, neighborhood cap. This takes it further into from residential districts entirely into specific neighborhoods, and then we'd create a neighborhood cap. Each neighborhood would be given a number of certificates that could be issued. Once that number is reached, no new certificates would be issued until such a time as is recorded falls below that cap number. Residential properties, again, in good standing, could continue to renew, subject to meeting all requirements. And then once that number falls below the cap limit, new property owners to come in. Policy number 4 is a lottery. Explore the creation of a lottery system that would require all short-term rental seekers to submit an application for entry into a lottery. The city would host a lottery drawing in which a set amount of certificates would then be awarded. The lottery would be held every year or alternatively every other year. Therefore, certificates would expire after a 2-year period. Each former certificate holder would need to reapply to enter into the lottery system. And then number 5, no action. You take no action, we continue on as is.
All right. I'm inclined to kind of go around the room and get people's thoughts or, but I think this is something where I would be curious to get everybody's thoughts and we don't have to go around the room, but
Just a question I would have on just the very caps. If someone sells their home, do they have to reapply for the certificate? I would feel like that would be tough for people who are trying to sell their homes and then they just have to start all over again in that process. And the values might drop because of that. Or does it stay with the home?
That'd be up to the task force on recommendations.
So that is the question that I have. How would we handle that?
Currently, it doesn't stay, right?
Yeah, you'd have to be, but there's no limit, so anybody could do it, so there's not. a limit.
Yeah, I wonder if, I'm just playing this out in my mind and forgetting the granularity for a second, you have some geographic area where you're limiting the number of short-term rentals. And now you're saying that the short-term rental is going to could follow the house to a sale. The people on the wait list, if there is one, seems to me would be a little bit unfair to them, just in my mind. I guess that's just what, if you combine that and said that you only have a set term and then it rolls off and you go to the back of the line or something like that, and there's a round robin, then maybe that's more fair, but I don't know, just my own opinion is that it'd be a little bit, then we'd be getting into, bidding up houses just because they come with an STR permit. I don't know.
Right.
To think about that
Yeah.
a little bit. It's a good question.
and it seems like letting a license transfer with the house sort of defeats the point of having a cap. I mean, the cap will never work if the license goes on in perpetuity.
Mm.
So I don't think that would work. I think if you have a cap, then when the house is sold or transfers ownership, the cap, or the license goes away until you are underneath the cap.
Right. And I guess it would make sense, like, so in a neighborhood, say the cap is 10 and somebody sells their home, if there's nobody on the waiting list, then that house
Correct.
would be first to be able to say, yeah, we'd like to be a short-term rental there. But if there's somebody on the waiting list, it's fair to go to that next person and then they have to get in line to be the next. Is that what you're thinking?
That's what I'm thinking. That's what makes sense to me. And I think, because it's a great question, Lauren. And I guess tying to that, we've had a lot of discussion around enforcement and what happens if you have problems with certain, STRs and they get, is their permit suspended or is it canceled and do they go to the back of the line? I guess that ties into the same kind of thought process, right? But that would have to be ironed out as well.
Right.
And I don't know how far we're getting into the how you do it versus what you do, but
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to have some sense of it to be able to have a feel, but I do think there will be, the devil will be in the details when we get to actually implementing it and the lawyers will need to get involved and, process and all of that.
The
But
legal ramifications of this is my concern is just, I go back to the very first meeting when a gentleman came up who was trying to sell his home. He was not an investment property for him. He lived there. He had no issues with the rentals. He had one on each side of him and he had a prospective buyer who wanted to use his as an investment property. At the time, the moratorium was the big discussion and they walked away. So that gentleman lost that opportunity. Is that fair to that guy? I mean,
It's,
No.
you know, so my thought on that is as tough as it is for some people who will be disadvantaged. I don't think the role of government is to protect property values. I mean, we don't want to do things that are reckless, but all sorts of things affect property values. I think we need to make decisions we think are right for the city. Caps aren't new. I mean, they've been around for years in other places. If we decided to do one, I think we would want to set it up so that it's as fair as possible to everybody. So, you know, my own opinion is you would grandfather current licenses. I disagree with having a cap higher than where we currently are. I think if we're going to do a cap, we would want to do it lower than we currently are, especially in the residential neighborhoods. I mean, capping the Hill at what I think is an insane number of houses sort of, I don't think that solves the problem. So, and if we did that, I mean, there would be some people who would be disadvantaged, but also you look at over the past 5 years, housing prices have increased 50%. Unless you bought a short-term rental in the last 2 years and sold it now, or, you know, when the cap was implemented, you wouldn't make as much money if housing prices go down, but you probably wouldn't lose money. And I think if what we're solving for is kind of getting some of our neighborhoods back, the residential neighborhoods back, so the Hill, and I would add to that Peninsula West, I think we need to have a cap that is meaningfully below where it is, where current saturation is. Know that it would take time to get there. Know that actually this is probably a pretty good time to do that given the significant appreciation in home values. So I think it minimizes the impact on individual SDR owners. And also with some softening in the STR market. I mean, it looks like, you know, there has been some softness this summer, that makes it a good time too. I mean, we're kind of, you know, stable-ish. And so better to make a significant change when things are stable-ish than to see further degradation. I mean, I thought Brian Schipper's letter nailed it. And I think we haven't spent enough time talking about the toll of short-term rentals on current full-time residents' quality of life and their housing values. I mean, I'm not going to buy, I mean, who wants to buy a house on a street with, you know, 10 short-term rentals in one house? I think that diminishes home values for those people. So I guess that's my way of saying I think we need to cap, but I think, you know, I would personally say 20% on the Hill and Peninsula West, and that now's a good time to do that.
I'm sorry, this is Kate Quick. I just called in to listen to the meeting. I just purchased a house on the Hill, and I'm just wondering.
Excuse me, this is, we'll get to a public comment at the end of this meeting. So
That's what I was wondering, if we were going to go through all 5. Thanks.
You bet, thanks.
I
Go.
guess I would echo your comments, Holly, with no surprise to anybody here, but I think, and I guess, you know, kind of getting back to, you know, the discussion topic around the different policies and which one I support, I think, you know, when I look at that letter nailed it in my mind as well. I look at the neighborhood cap, right? Again, I'm coming at it as a resident that's sitting in a very high dense zone right now. And, you know, a cap of 20% to me seems, you know, reasonable when I look at it in a very granular sense, and I look at what's around me as a resident and what's around my house, right? And how many there should be. And I think that I don't agree with doing it at the city level. I think,
right.
And I think we do have consensus that commercial zones should be excluded from any type of caps. And I hope I think everybody's on board with that. I certainly am. But, you know, kind of taking it down, I look at the neighborhood cap level and I say, okay, if we can, you know, cap where we are and let it natural attrition take it down to certain levels where there's too much, in my opinion, too much density in terms of short-term rentals, it's gonna, you know, serve our community better. I also think that if there is truly a little bit of softness going on in the market now, we're never going to have a better opportunity to do it. And, you know, with the risk of sounding like I'm overselling my thoughts here, you know, that there's probably some economic benefit and protections to the people that currently own short-term rentals by, you know, taking away a little bit of the supply. I think that that might help prop up, you know, the rates a little, especially if we're limiting some of the occupancy. Not that that's our job. I don't think our job should be to preserve the economics of people making investments outside of our community into our community. But I think it's a reasonable thing to go back to the people that live here and say, you know, we're not going to let the area around people who are trying to make a home here. We're not going to let the area around your house become overly saturated. And that's happening right now. So I would, without a doubt, support policy 3. I would love to see it 20%. It's way over 20% now, but a cap policy in certain neighborhoods that are too dense, you know, maybe it'll push out into some of the areas that are less dense and, you know, we can find equilibrium somewhere. That's just my thought, and that's what I would support.
Madam Chair, if we might, if the task force was willing to do this,
Can you speak into your mic a little bit more?
if the task force is willing, to review the policies and then kind of align with a policy together, then we could dive more into the mechanics of that, if the task force is okay with that. Because I'm hearing proponents of some items.
Let's go, before we have that discussion, see sort of where we are, and then we can take it from there. Kathy, and you know, one other thing in the report, Kathy's last name was misspelled, so if you could correct that.
Oh, no.
I know.
Of all the recommendations, the neighborhood cap would be the only one that I could support, and not at a 20% level, but at some reasonable level. However, I don't believe that caps are really going to do what everybody wants them to do. I think enforcement is, I think good neighbor policies and really knowing who those people are living next to you are going to actually be more helpful. Neighborhoods and what the definition is of a neighborhood and what your denominators and numerators are, that's going to be a big issue. I happen to live in R2 on Lake Street, as do a couple other people own property down there. And we're not dense at all because we have condominiums there and they have rules that they can't rent. So, you know, but we're almost all short-term rental, almost the whole block. There's about 3 of us that live there. So your neighborhood and what piece of your neighborhood is going to be a really important part. You can't just say the whole hill. That's not going to make, that's going to include a lot of people. Peninsula you might be able to do, but you're going to have to define what that neighborhood is if you're going to do it that way. That's my
Yeah,
thought.
I like the idea of the neighborhood cap, but it's defining that neighborhood and how you do that. You know, it's the details that are the challenging part, where you're like street by street, because that's kind of how it feels to me. It's a lot of,
Yeah.
you know, neighborhoods are kind of street by street. They're all different, right? They're all very different. So you know, that's just the hard part. I'm not sure how to define that.
Yeah.
I know it's not our job to define that, but it would be nice if we had our idea, if we were, you know, if our thoughts were wrapped around what that looked like, it would be easier for us to make recommendations.
Could it not be as simple as, you know, any one short-term rent, any one block has X number of short-term? I mean, if you have one short-term rental, you can't have another one for, you know, you can draw a geographic boundary around, I would think. Anyway, I don't want to, you're right.
Yeah, and so maybe what we get to, and I'm curious to hear from others too, is if we kind of land on the idea of a neighborhood approach would be good, then we can follow up on how, you know, what that might be look like and what we're solving for there. Is it really on a block by block that the saturation is no more than X%? And then again, I think it will be incumbent on planning and then staff with planning and then with council on how might this work. And there might be a couple of different ways they would look at that. Kevin?
All right. Let me be very clear first, okay? This is not coming from me as a property manager. Me personally, I do think there are too many rentals. I've said it before, we actually turn more down than we take. And I know there's been a lot of momentum with the wonderfully written letter by the one resident. However, if you look at the data that we put together, I don't see anything so significant that we should be going one way or another. These numbers, to me, they're not 50-50, but they're not like it should all be this or should all be that. Okay, this is from the community. This is the stuff we put all this work into to get this information from our residents. And then just the second thing that I'm not comfortable with, I'm just concerned, and I'm also not very educated in this part, but I'm concerned about the legal ramifications of you telling someone what they can or cannot do with their home. Now, I could be way off, but that's just how I feel. I still think the strongest thing is along Kathy's lines about enforcement and do all you can to prevent issues to happen before they even get there. And I'm all for that, but I'm concerned about any cap for those reasons.
So one thing I want to point out, to your point, Kevin, and I think some of the charts are misleading, and one chart I think would have been helpful to have in here was from page 23 of the last meeting. It was full-time primary home residents for a residential district cap. And I'm assuming, you know, a neighborhood cap results might be comparable. But when you looked at it on, there was really strong, I mean, so for the northeast side of the river, again, vast majority strongly agreed with a cap. On the Hill, again, vast majority agreed with it. So when you cut the data McKenna did on a neighborhood basis, there is evidence in our survey that supported that. And I would encourage McKenna to include that chart in the final report, because I think that it's misleading to not include that, because I don't think.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I think it's on page 14 of your, this packet
It
as
is?
well, that covers the implemented cap on short-term rentals in residential districts, what the full-time residents thought, and then there's also a chart on what the part-time residents thought. Is that,
You're right, I'm sorry.
I just want to make sure we're talking about the same, yep,
Well, that was part, so what page you're looking at?
14.
So what is the difference between residential or citywide? Cap on residential versus citywide?
Yeah.
People were against that, but a cap on residential, it seemed as though people.
Right. Okay. I'm sorry. My mistake. So this is the same chart. Yeah, it does. The dimensions are different. But so I do think if we look at that chart, there's pretty clear support for caps. So I
read it the
was
same way.
right. So I was somewhat, so when you read your report, it looks like it feels skewed to me about resistance to caps, where I think this chart, which gets to the neighborhoods, is pretty strongly supportive.
So should we put more weight on the people who are full-time residents
I think we should.
but everyone pays taxes?
Again, is that?
Everyone
litigation?
pays.
I'm just asking.
Yeah,
It's because I mean, I think that's opening you guys up. I mean, because once I'm off this, I'm off, but I think it's going to be opening you guys up
Yeah.
to litigation issues where people are saying, well, so they're, you know, because they're full-time residents, that has more weight, you know, I'm paying, you know, more taxes, or I'm doing this, or however it's working out. And again, I'm, you know, with Kevin in this sense, you know, I'm looking at these things, again, you know, Brian's letter, you know, these property management companies, or, you know, whoever that, you know, oversold the house, 14, someone should be going after them. And I feel like, you know, with these guidelines, which I loved his guidelines, are great, 13 of these guidelines were looking as a task force recommending that we implement these things. So I think for us to jump right off into a cap right out of the gate before we even try with these recommendations to see, I think, you know, we're gonna be shooting ourselves in the foot at that. I just feel, you know, in that sense.
I hear you. My concern with that is I think this, if we're going to do a cap, now's the time to do a cap. I mean, the markets, the values are strong. The short-term rental market's fairly stable. And just practically, it took the city how many years to address this issue formally? I mean, 20, 10, at least 10. We've been kicking the can down the road. And so to the credit of city council, they said, you know what, we're going to deal with this. We're dealing with it. To get, if that doesn't work, to resurrect it again, feels like a big lift. And it would take years if we did a cap to get there just with attrition. And if it doesn't, if we instituted a cap and it wasn't working, I think it would be a heartbeat. It could be repealed. But if we don't do one and decide we need one, I think it would take maybe not quite an act of God, but it would take a you know, strong backbones to reassemble all of this. And again, my thoughts.
I mean, the data supports, I read the data read the data the same way. You know, I think we heard from in public comment in our last meeting, and I've had the same feeling myself when I took the survey, that people got confused when it started getting to the how you respond to the percentages. And I know that skewed some of the responses, but it seems to me right here, I don't know how you, seems like there's strong support. And it also seems to correlate with where we have the higher percentages of short-term rentals.
Right. My interpretation is people who live in neighborhoods with a lot of short-term rentals want something done.
Enough's enough.
And maybe what we do, I know, you know, we still have public comment. We're coming on 5 minutes. Maybe what we do is hear from the rest of you and then ask McKenna to, because my guess is what we might recommend to planning and then, you know, is to say, here are a couple of directions that, you know, the task force felt could be viable. There wasn't one option that everybody agreed on, and suggest that planning spend more time, you know, that they take our great input. Because I think most of the recommendations we're going to be making, there's really strong consensus as we've gone through what Kyle just went through today. So I feel like that's awesome. If we don't all agree, I think that's okay. I mean, I think we can say, here are the different views, smart, reasonable, awesome people came down differently, and we think you should, you know, dig in further. Might be, and again. So I don't think, so we've heard from Lauren. Sean?
You really want to hear from me?
I do. I absolutely want to hear from you.
15 minutes.
Okay, I might take up your 15 minutes, but I have a hard time starting out with segregating between whether you're full-time, whether you're part-time. I feel as a property owner in Saugatuck, Douglas, Fenville, numerous places, that I have the same type of ownership within the community as someone who lives there full-time. I treat it that way. I was brought up that way, that I treat everyone with respect, dignity, try to do the right thing. So every time I hear that I don't have a say like a local or a full-time, my mind goes crazy. So that's my first step. My second step is, as I heard everyone today, it makes me think of the snowplow guys in the street. about someone that says, I want my street plowed first. I go to work early. I want my street plowed. And how to manage to get through there. And at the end of the day, you come up with a plan, you determine what makes sense, what doesn't make sense, but no one street is favored over another street of what gets plowed first. I also believe, and I hope I'm not going to go crazy here, I do not believe it's the role of the government to tell me what to do. I think I was raised right, and I got to make decisions based on what's right and not right. So I don't like the idea of someone telling me what to do. So I have a hard problem with that. But when I think of all that, of what I believe personally, I got to go back to why I'm here again. And I do believe that caps will not solve the issues. And when I look at those surveys, the biggest part of the survey were the issues that we have in some of our recommendations was the no, I mean, I bring this up every time I get a chance to talk, but that's the community. That's the community saying we have these issues. That's the community saying we have to solve these. If we can't solve those, the cap really means nothing. I understand that this might be the right time economically and all that, but we've also talked about it. So if a cap would come up in the future, we've done a lot of homework already this whole summer to determine what a next step would be. I do believe occupancy is our issue and not necessarily a cap. I do believe that if you put a cap in zone A, will that drive an investor to go to zone B or go to zone C? Would that drive someone who has made an investment and can't get a short-term rental renewed to go rogue and do it without it and not follow the rules? How do you determine commercial, residential, R1, R2, multifamily? There's a lot of that co-mixed in, meaning across the street is residential, this side is commercial. So you still have a problem that this commercial can do this residential can do this. It's a tough decision to make, no matter whose opinion they have. And I do believe that we all have our opinion, and I believe that this part of our task here as the task force is to let everyone know kind of how we feel. But I do know that Saugatuck is a unique city. There is several people that have moved here 2 years ago, several people that have been here for 100 years, families that have been here for 100 years. And we've always had challenges, and we've always been able to succumb to what makes sense and move forward from there. I think with what we've learned so far, we've strived so far forward from where we were in May when this started, just discussing it, just having the reality. The people who wanted to buy a house had read it. They go, oh, I want nothing to do with it because they have these issues going on. We've solved a lot of those problems already. I also feel that some of the recommendations we're going to have are also going to solve some of the problems. So if I were going to think of some sort of a recommendation, I would recommend that we try some of our procedures and maybe have one of the recommendations that if we assess it and we find that that didn't reach a threshold that was comfortable, that we could have it fall into a cap situation for a certain area or whatever, but that would take monitoring. That would take monitoring the enforcement of what we put in place. That would take, seeing how our occupancy works, the noise level works. I mean, there's a lot of loaded questions yet in even our recommendations, but I think this is a great step in where we're going and we're moving forward with it. But I also don't think that it should end at this. I don't think that we can just pass it off to the next planning commission and then it's kind of set in stone and we walk away. I mean, I'm going to be going to planning commission, so watch out. But I think it's important. But I think what's also very important for me is, whether I made an investment or not, I chose this area to be my home. I live 500 feet north of the Saugatuck city line, but it's still my home. I consider the whole surrounding area from Holland my home. That's where I started. But I'm conscious, and I think I'm conscious of who my neighbors are, and I go to meet my neighbors, and I've met several people that have had concerns, with public comment, and went to their areas to find out what they were talking about, so I could fully understand what the area was. And I see where they're coming from. I understand where they're coming from, but I don't think Park Street's any different than Pleasant Street. I also see a lot of weird stuff like, wow, you forgot to put your trash in this week. I mean, so it's a little bit of, hypocrisy with it too, but I'm just proud that we've made it this far, to be able to say that we've acknowledged this. CAP is one thing of our recommendation, but I truly believe we have a lot of great recommendations here, other than CAPs, that are going to make huge improvements to the system. And I think the citizens will not be happy with everything we come up with, whatever we come up with, but I think they also should really consider how important it is that we are able to make some improvements with whatever comes out of this, whatever next step it goes to planning, whatever next step it goes to city council. And at the end of the day, locals, part-times, visitors, they all come to this community and know that we have open arms. We're here to welcome them, and we hope that they fall in love with it like we did, to either make the investment to move here full-time or want to move here when they retire. I mean, that's a great community in my opinion. And to say, we'd love to have you here, but scares me.
Okay, thanks. Elizabeth?
I'm not for a citywide cap, not for the lottery system. I struggle with policy 2 and 3. I understand the neighborhood cap, and I think it's difficult to monitor, but maybe that's not what I should be worried about. Residential district cap, I struggle a little bit with that, and the fact that I feel like there's homestead people that are renting out their house, not all the time. I have a problem with the rentals that are for business only, which are gonna be your non-homestead, but then I also know that there's homestead people, non-homestead people that have purchased a house that wanna retire here and are not necessarily renting it out full-time as a business. So I guess that's where I'm at.
Okay.
And we want those people to be able to move here and retire here and
Yep.
contribute to our community. So.
Kevin, did we get you?
Yeah.
Okay, so Anne, I think we haven't heard from, okay. So, yeah, I think we heard from Lauren. So here's what I'm hearing is sort of the issues where there's some difference of opinion that we think is important to note. One is sort of the issue whether full-time residents or, part-time residents and full-time residents get more weight. I mean, what Sean just said, I think that's something to flag because I think there's a difference of opinion there. I think there are some people who think we should just go with all of the recommendations, but not the cap. So we've talked about a lot of stuff today. Let's go with that and start with that. And if that doesn't take care of the issue, that will be revisited in the future. Another sort of the other side of that is people saying all of those, things. Plus we do think it sounds like there's more consensus around neighborhood or residential areas. However, that would have to be defined, and that there is some appetite for a cap there. I think there's a difference in the magnitude of that. I think Kathy comes in on a lower side than Joe and I would. And then there's concern about what does this all mean legally? And I think, we all would want to be sure that, so the lawyers clearly will need to work with Ryan and whatever. I think that captures sort of where we are. And so Kyle, maybe you can reflect that back in the report as this is, the view, and the recommendation be that further, that's the work to go from here is with this wisdom, take that into account. If we do that and get the report in enough time so that we can all thoughtfully digest it, then I think we come back in 2 weeks and kind of wrap up. And if there's some tweaking we want to do that and then provide it to the planning commission. Would that work for folks? And does that capture the difference of where we are?
I think it does from my point of view, Madam Chair. And I would just add, to the degree we can get the draft final report, whatever you want to call it, sooner rather than later, so we can kind of all make notes on it. And then we can probably expedite next meeting, getting a final, kind of read on it, be my take.
Ryan, you feel good with that?
Yeah, so what I'm hearing is that you kind of want reflected in the final report, kind of the mix of sentiments that were expressed here related to the caps, that there's not an outright recommendation from the task force on caps or consensus recommendation, but that there were a variety of views, and you're asking McKenna to kind of express that in the report.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I do want to honor council's request that we deliver something by the 21st. And it feels like we've done a heck ton of work. And when I say heck, that wasn't the word in my head. The really good recommendations. So, and I think there's, more thought to be done, and ultimately it's a policy decision. So Lauren, have fun with that. Awesome. Good. Okay. I think we can wrap up this section. The last part of the agenda was the correspondence, and we've all many of us have referenced Brian Schipper's letter. Thank you, Brian, if you are listening. I think many people benefited from that, which gets us to public comment number 2. Anyone in the room? Yep.
Diana Decker, 128 Elizabeth. I'm not a public speaker, but I wrote some notes down here.
Can you lower your
right
just a little bit?
here?
There you go. Thank you.
I read the fire department letter regarding safety and quite a few points, and hopefully if a home doesn't pass fire inspection, hopefully the city does not approve that certificate. I would think there would be some type of liability there if they're renting a home and they don't have that approval. And they're also saying, if they have a yearly, city wants them to yearly inspect, then it would require a full-time inspector. So that's a cost, not sure what that would be. They're talking about Saugatuck Township, City of Douglas. City of Saugatuck is not Saugatuck Township. City of Douglas is not City of Saugatuck. All 3 communities are different. Most municipalities have their own master plan. That master plan is dated 2016, the tri-communities. I'm just mentioning that because you go to other municipalities, they have their own master plan. Even like the police, we separated the police, the assets. So Douglas has full-time police. We do not. I've always been concerned about you to keep talking and talking, enforcement. How is that going to work? The good neighbor policy, I'm concerned about that. A couple years ago, I pulled into my driveway and felt like I was being watched. I turned around and the neighbor waved to me and said, "Diana, how you doing?" I said, "I'm exhausted." And he said, "What's going on?" I said, "The neighbor was partying all night." I said, "I almost was gonna go over there." And he said, "Good thing you didn't. He would have probably gotten violent with you because he was arrested." So I'm concerned about that good neighbor policy going over, knocking on somebody's door. I've heard comments about homestead, non-homestead, the residents. If you look at your tax bills, all the non-homestead, all the homestead, we all pay the same millage, fire, roads, library, and an urban. We pay the same mills if you're non-homestead or homestead. The only difference is that non-homestead residents are paying the 18 mills for the school, that portion. Mr. Skipper's letter, Brian Skipper, that was an excellent letter.
Great. Time's up. Thank you. Anyone else in the room?
I might as well get up to 130 Perryman Street. I just want to tell you a little story why I think we probably should have a moratorium. I've gotten numerous letters in the mail, phone calls to buy my cottage. A couple weeks ago, I opened up my emails. Oh, we love your house. We want to buy it. How'd they get my email? So I'm looking down the bottom of the email and it's in Arabic. Arabic. And to the right of that, it said UAE. United Arab Emirates. Now, is some sheik going to fly over on his G5 and live in my cottage and go over to Oval Beach? I don't think so. You know, this whole business about whose ox is going to get gored. This is all about money. I'm not so sure it's all about the quality of life here in Saugatuck. I've been around here a long time. I'm concerned we have so many empty homes that families could be living in and sending their children to the school. That's been my first and probably my ultimate concern about all this. Empty homes, declining school population. And I don't know if anyone's actually thought about this, but empty homes, there's some people that are thinking, that looks kind of tempting. I just might go visit them. We've had that problem over on the west side in years past. So I think this is something we really need to look at, be concerned about. If someone has a short-term rental and they're right on site next door, I don't have a problem with that, because that person is going to be concerned about the noise, the trash, the parking. But when you get all these big companies that are getting into this, this is big business. And what do they care about? I like money, but not like that.
Thank you, Jane. Go for it.
Gary Kemp. I live at 1022 Holland Street on the river side of Holland Street down by the city limits. And I really agree with everything Sean said, and I really think that caps are the wrong thing to do. I think they do take care of themselves. Just to give you an example, in my little neighborhood there, we had basically around my house, I have a cottage, so I have a rental. There were two other cottages on the river there that were rentals. There was a house right next door towards the city limits, and it had a garage and it had a rental over it. Now, there have been three owners that moved in. One of them has built the big White House that sits there. He's from Chicago, and he took away one of the rentals. The next lot over, a gentleman from South Bend bought, and he's building a house there right now. You can see under construction, and that took away two rentals. So my little cottage rental is the only rental left. And what you're going to have there are very beautiful homes with very expensive lots and a lot of money invested. They're not going to rent those as short-term rentals. Those are for them. They want to live in that community. They want to vacation in this community, and they're not going to do short-term rentals. And across the street, we have all kinds of short-term rentals. those are being bought by people who are, some of which are investors. And I hear this thing about investors versus residents or people who want to come to this community, just like Sean says. He doesn't live in the community. He's an investor, but he loves the community and he's contributing to the community and in this forum, et cetera. And I just think that this takes care of itself as the community continues to be desirable. People want to come to this community. They buy the properties, they upgrade the properties. Yes, some of them are going to rent them, and you're going to have some rentals around you. But to set a cap, I think is just the wrong thing. And I think you are opening up yourselves to credible lawsuits. But what you put in place, just with the recommendations, as I understand them, and I agree with all of them so far pretty much, you put all that in place on rentals, maximum occupancy, inspections, fees, all this kind of stuff. It's going to really have an amazing effect at controlling rentals. And I think you do have to go through that before you start to cap things, because I think that's a can of worms you do not want to get into. And I think we'll take care of 80% of the problems just with implementing the recommendations of this group. So that's my feeling, but please don't do a lottery either. That's a horrible thing to even think about. The can of worms that is. But that's my thoughts.
Thank you, Gary. Anyone else in the room? All right, let's go online. Anybody on Zoom want Ethan?
Yeah, Ethan Barty, Quaint Cottages. We also own some, we manage properties much like Kevin, and we also own some. Yeah, I agree with the gentleman that just talked and Sean, 100%. A lot of this stuff's going to take care of itself, I believe. We all want our property values to go up. So to have someone next door that can have vacation rental property and sell it as one, and you can't lower the value. I think it's just going to be a big problem. My wife, Tammy Kurz in real estate, she's selling houses. She's probably moved 5 families in the last year into town and around town. The property value is going up is a good thing for all of us. It's not necessarily good for the investor. My wife comes to me several times, hey, investor wants to buy a property in Saugatuck as a rental. $600,000 house, $800,000 house. She's like, what will it rent for? We do the math. It's under a 5% return. I don't think the, United Emirates are gonna, want less than a 5% return. I think we enforce the rules. With the property values going up, there are already people, looking to sell their vacation rental because the numbers aren't working. They did buy it just for an investment, and it's very difficult with the city taxes, with all the fees and everything to do. It's everybody thinks it's easy to make a lot of money, and that's not the case, anymore. So it's kind of a false sense that everybody is making a ton of money. So I think we just enforce the ordinances and the rules. And, I think it's going to correct itself. We don't have to discriminate and discriminate areas and neighborhoods. So I'm definitely not for a cap. As far as the limits, I think we follow the fire department. Personally, I think, 2 per bedroom, anything over 16, follow what the fire department says. I'm not sure 12, is good. I think anything over 15 or 16, but if you have, 7 bedrooms, 2 per bedroom, they can get out the window, and it's good, safe wise. I don't know why you would set it lower than that. I think parking, needs to be a part of that equation, and trash. So if you have a, 7-bedroom house and parking for 2 cars, yeah, needs to be addressed. But anyway, those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Ethan. Kate?
Thank you. My name is Kate Thompson Quick, and I just purchased a house on Hoffman Street in the area referred to as the Hill. And actually the property is alongside a parking lot. So I, in the last month, have become very familiar with why people come to Saugatuck. They come for the restaurants, the shows, they park right next to our house, lots of them. It's a very well-lit parking lot, and I really haven't had any issues, and I see crowds of people walking past this house. I have a few questions and comments. In terms of adoption date, that was mentioned a few times when we were talking about this policies 1 through 5. What is the estimated or assumed future adoption date? Because I think it'll be important to talk about what that looks like, especially for people like me who just bought a property, that if I ever want to do a short-term rental, do I need to get it ready in the next 30 days to even be a part of any cap, or do I have 6 months? Or I feel like without knowing the date.
This isn't really a Q&A session. It's a public comment, but you can follow up with the director of planning afterwards, and he can provide guidance.
Okay, so there is some date out there. It would be good to add it to these documents then.
I didn't say that. I'm just saying that question, if you can direct it to the director of planning, and that this isn't a Q&A session.
Okay, and then policy 5, my feedback is I would change the title from no action to establish or revise your enforcement. I too am not supportive of the caps. I don't think that approach really resolves the issues as they were laid out. On the fire department recommendation, I think it would be good to clarify what's the difference between short and long for the city of Saugatuck. A lot of municipalities have different rules about what constitutes short and long. I wasn't clear what the fire department is constituting short and long, and if it varies by city. And then number 8 on the fire department list, it says the fee are out of date, and I would like them to specify what about the fee is out of date. And then item 9, it says what number of rentals makes a rental dwelling? Meaning, is it 1 rental in a year? Is it 5 rentals in a year? Does it vary by insurance policy company? So I think that section 9 probably needs further clarification. In closing, I want flexibility to occasionally rent my home. I'm predominantly going to be here. Policies 1 through 4 concern me greatly as a new homeowner in the town, and I'm really happy to be a part of it. So thank you for all your hard work to the team that pulled this data together and hosting the conversation. I appreciate it.
Great, thanks, Kate, and welcome to Saugatuck. Anybody else online? All right, anyone else in the room? Oh yeah, Mike.
Yes, my name's Michael Economist. I guess I want to ask a question. Did I understand you to say that there can only be a 2-bed, a bedroom is only for 2 people? Is that a law now, or is that something to be determined?
Yeah, again, this isn't a Q&A session. But if you can follow up with the director of planning to get more clarification.
Okay.
And what we're talking about here is recommendations, nothing, anything we've talked about is not changing right now and may not ever.
All right. Well, I just feel that everybody talks about the homes on the hills, but on the west side of the river here, we have a lot of different situations. And like my home is surrounded by 4 homes, 1 on either side of me and 2 in back of me. You're going to have a difficult time, I think, on our end of town, setting boundaries and things like that. I don't know, although I'm in favor of the boundaries, but it's difficult to do it. The fire chief talked about the dangers and the reasons for the inspections and everything like that. I totally agree with him. I think they should be inspected every year. But, there's a home right next to me and I don't know how far it is from the nearest fire hydrant. So I think that has to be looked into on our side of the town. And that's all I have to say right now.
Thank you. Last call online or in the room?
Yes, I have a question.
Yep.
Okay, my name is Doug Alone. I reside at 633 Butler Street. And a couple points, if I may. One on the capacity of individuals residing inside the home. There were some different volumes of people discussed from a standpoint of 2 per bedroom, or one extra person on the floor, or caps at 12. I would be personally in favor of a situation where there would be a maximum of 2 per bedroom, but 1 additional per floor, and perhaps a cap of 12 or 15 in the house as a total. And here's why. We have a lot of kids ourselves, and just think about as a resident, you having kids coming in and sleepovers with kids. Sometimes more than 2 kids can sleep in one room at a time. Some will sleep on a couch. Some will even sleep on the floor in a sleeping bag, and that's totally acceptable under current residential laws. That's not prohibited. So is the city going to enforce against residents the same rules as far as occupancy as they will with short-term renters? And so it seems to me there needs to be taken consideration as to what the residents actually use the home for, with children and so forth. And in those instances, it's totally fine to have extra people sleeping over. So I'd just like the committee to take that in consideration. And secondly, one point with respect to the fire marshal's comment on the capacity of the department to conduct the inspections. I think it's a great idea. I'd be more in favor of every other year, which is better than the current policy. And here's why. There currently is a burden on the fire department now for conducting 800 plus inspections a year for the short-term rentals, plus all the other inspections they must take place on an annual basis with restaurants and hotels, et cetera. So what was unclear to me is, does the fire department currently have the capacity to even go to a 1 per year type situation of inspecting the short-term rentals? So if McKenna could perhaps provide a comment in the report about whether the current fire department has capacity to take on additional inspections 1 time a year versus 2 per year, I'd like to know that. My vote would be not to increase manpower and overhead to the fire department, or be able to, or be needed to hire more people to conduct more inspections. So I would like to know if our current fire department could take on the inspections with perhaps a 2 or an inspection every other year. Thank you for your time, and thank you for the committee for all their hard work.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. I think that's it. Any final comments from anybody on the task force? Okay. Then a motion to adjourn the meeting. Second.
I'll second.
All right. All in favor? Aye. Thanks, everybody. Great meeting.